Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the game between the Sharks and the Red Wings, in which the Sharks lost 3-2. This was in contrast to the game that the Sharks played couple of weeks back against the Red Wings, which they managed to win 5-3. In both of those games, they actually trailed to the Red Wings at some point. This one 3-0. The previous one 3-1, but it was a Joe Pavelski hat trick that brought them back into that one that gave them the 5-3 victory. They did not have that magic tonight, certainly in part to the fact that Joe Pavelski was not in the lineup tonight to try and even pull off a hat trick. So while the Sharks were able to get two and bring it close, it was not close enough, and the Sharks squandered a great opportunity because of the fact that the Calgary Flames earlier tonight lost to the Los Angeles Kings, a team that many were angry with the Sharks losing to, but they pull off a huge upset there, as well as the Golden Knights having lost to the St. Louis Blues. So the Sharks could have pulled to within 4 of Calgary, including a matchup that they'll have against the Calgary Flames in just about a week's time. If they had won that game and tonight's game, they'd be within 2 points. Definitely a possibility to pass, because I think the Sharks have the tiebreaker, if I'm not 100% sure, but they end up remaining in the same spot here now, 6 points behind the Calgary Flames now with only 6 games remaining. Definitely going to be tough to try and get back into it. This was really their one chance unless the Flames really struggle down the stretch here. The first period certainly didn't start off very well for the San Jose Sharks, and it really started out as if nothing had changed from the previous 5 losses, as right away the Sharks make a terrible defensive play. They give Dylan Larkin, the Red Wings' best player, and who I am very hyped up about. I think if the Red Wings were an actual good team with good players, Larkin could be like a Datsuk type of player for the Red Wings like they used to have in Datsuk a few years ago, but now he's basically sort of like not a one-man show, but he's definitely running the offense there for the Red Wings in my opinion, and he gets a beautiful breakaway goal, and breakaway definitely ended up being a common theme of this game for the Red Wings as they get 4 separate breakaways. You could maybe even argue 5, depending on how you view N's goal, the short-handed one. It was also then Athanasiou. Not as great of a move, but definitely a lot of speed that managed to get Martin Jones. And then Mantha and Athanasiou again in the third period with breakaways, Martin Jones making the saves on both of those. The Sharks, while behind 3-0, they did manage to make it close, as I said, Evander Kane's 28th, so nice to see him get on the board, and Tomas Hertl's 33rd, but that one came in the last about 5 seconds of the game, so it was mostly over at that point, so basically just to make it look better than a 3-1 loss, I guess. First thing to talk about would be Martin Jones. Many people have been criticizing Martin Jones, and rightfully so. He has been subpar this season, certainly, and even many non-Sharks fans have pointed to him as being the weak link for the Sharks in their potential cup run. They'll say, well, the Sharks' offense is good, and have you looked at that stacked defense on paper? It's Martin Jones with these terrible stats, but many people have also brought up the counter-argument that defense is not really doing him any favors, and I guess this is definitely Exhibit A and some great evidence of that because of the fact that, as I said, they gave up 4 breakaways, and you could even argue a 5th one here with N's goal. They really didn't give the Red Wings much in terms of offensive zone time and forecheck or anything like that, and when they did, Jones came up with some nice saves, but if you're going to give up 4 breakaways or 5 with the N one, if you consider that, you're probably not going to get that many saves. I mean, Jones did an admirable job-ish, making a couple of those on Mantha and Athanasiou, but especially since those 4 breakaways go to Larkin, Athanasiou second time, and Mantha, probably the 3 best forwards on the Red Wings, you're not going to have that great luck in that regard. So, I mean, how can you potentially blame Martin Jones for a situation like this? I mean, technically, if he made one more save on a breakaway, this game goes to overtime, if you can look at it in that regard, although I don't know if the Sharks would have woken up at that point. But it's tough because Jones doesn't face many shots. He lets in the 3 goals here because of the grade A opportunities that the Red Wings were basically gifted just due to horrible giveaways from players like Ryan and Dylan and Braun. And so he gets some pretty bad stats in terms of save percentage, not the great stats in terms of goals against average, even though this game I would definitely not pin on him. Next, I'll talk about Brent Burns, who I thought actually had a pretty solid game, played just about 30 minutes tonight. I thought he was doing a lot of good things offensively, even if he didn't get a point. I thought he was doing some pretty good things defensively as well. Still a couple of usual Brent Burns boneheaded mistakes, but it's come to expect that, and none were really as egregious as some of the defensive mistakes that some of the other defensemen for the Sharks were making. And I feel like maybe Brent Burns was playing with a bit of a chip on his shoulder due to the comments earlier today from Drew Doughty about how Brent Burns shouldn't even be in the Norris conversation because he watches all of the Sharks games and Brent Burns always gives away the puck or something like that. And so maybe, hopefully, Brent Burns can maybe take that type of criticism from not some random analyst from like the media, but from a peer of, not a peer, I guess you're probably not good friends, but someone who he competes against like Drew Doughty. So hopefully Brent Burns can use that as motivation down the stretch, and maybe the Sharks can actually find a win here in these last 6 games, because with how these past 6 have gone, it's not looking too good thus far. And a reason for that would be the next 2 players here, Braun and Dillon. When the Sharks were on a winning streak, I had praised Dillon and Braun. Dillon especially has been, I felt like, the most consistent defenseman, or at least a defender, I should say, defensive defenseman for the Sharks this season. I thought Braun, who started up and down in the season, had really picked up his game as of late. But just as high as I was able to praise them then, I'm going to criticize them now because they've not been good at all. They've been horrific, I guess you could say. And even DeBoer has recognized at this point. Brendan Dillon ending up with the least amount of ice time for defensemen. He even had less ice time than Joakim Ryan, who was an absolute train wreck this game with some of his plays that he made. Justin Braun able to have a bit more ice time than Ryan, but not significantly more. And this was a duo that was getting, close to 20 minutes, especially with Karlsson out, because they had been sort of relied on to be shut down pairing, and they were doing a good job in that regard, but that has completely fallen off. The wheels are off the track, I guess you could say, and hopefully they can find their game again, because I know that they can, because we saw it earlier on this season. I don't think this is a doomed pair or anything like that, because the defensive pairings are not going to be changed necessarily. I don't think there's really anything that the Sharks could try, except for maybe just put Braun back with Vlasic and then try a Heed-Dillon pairing. I guess that's technically possible, although Braun and Vlasic hasn't been as good as it has been in the past this season. And I feel like at its peak, Braun and Dillon has probably been even better than Braun and Vlasic have looked this season. So I think this can work, but right now it's definitely not doing so. So maybe DeBoer should maybe try and change something up there. Next, I'll talk about Simek finally, as it's beginning to look less like a coincidence and maybe more like an actual fact that the Sharks can't seem to win with Simek outside of the lineup. They have now lost all 6 games since he got injured, and you'll recall during the first couple of months of the season, the Sharks were having many issues defensively. They couldn't seem to win consistently, and Simek's first game of the year happened to come right at the start of December against the Montreal Canadiens, and the turning point of the season for the Sharks also just so happened to be on that game against the Canadiens right after the thrashing at the hand of the Ottawa Senators 6-2. So Simek's arrival to the Sharks here corresponding with the Sharks' turnaround for the season, and the Sharks falling off with the 6-game losing streak corresponds to Simek's injury. Now, I won't say it's completely guaranteed that the Sharks lose all the games because Simek isn't playing. Of course, they did win games during the first 2 months, and the fact that Simek actually was injured at some point at the start of January. The Sharks played 2 games without him, games against the Avalanche and the Lightning, and they did win both. So I guess it's not the worst thing in the world, but then again, Karlsson was playing in those 2 games, and he was playing some great hockey at that time. But Joakim Ryan has clearly shown that he's not a good enough replacement for Simek. I had faith at the start. I had faith after his first game. That was actually pretty solid, but he's just not consistent enough. And he's just making some pretty horrific mistakes. I've liked the aggressiveness at least. At least he's not playing super scared, but maybe he should be, because some of the plays he's making, especially on the Athanasiou breakaway goal, have just been atrocious. Completely, really. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Thursday. They'll face off against the Blackhawks, a team that the Sharks have beaten twice this season. I believe 7-3 first and then 5-2 if I'm not mistaken. So if there's any team that the Sharks can break out of their slump against, it would probably be the Blackhawks. Now, of course, the Blackhawks are technically still pushing for a playoff spot, although it's most likely that they're not going to make it. I'm sure, the coach for the Blackhawks, Colleton, is not going to tell them that and not going to try and convince them of that. So they're definitely going to bring their A game. The Sharks, we haven't seen their A game in a while, but as I said, they have gotten 2 wins against the Blackhawks this season, so maybe, a team that they seem to be able to beat could shake them out of this slump that they're currently in. Class dismissed.